really very pleased to see many guests with us from governments. Thank you very much. And this is to share the reports which are going to be given in the next hour. So the idea is 3 questions for each rapporteur. We have 6 rapporteurs. What we're doing here is just a snapshot of what's gone on during these last two days. And as you see with Fatimo, the co-chair, we're going to be running the 3 questions through the 4 parallel working groups, and then the 2 special rapporteurs that we have on children and on women, one of the innovations of this Civil Society Days. Can I hand it over to you, Fatimo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello? Yeah. Thank you very much, Ignacio. We have a very nice sessions, and we have rapporteurs here. I'm going to introduce them one by one, the name and the organization they are representing, and the questions that we are going to ask them. I'm just starting for the woman rapporteur, Carl. And we have also some other sessions like Sustainable Development Goals, Rodolphe Cordova. We have also Charlie, who is also reporting labor mobility, labor right, and decent work. And we have also Migrant and Diaspora Empowerment and Action. Robtel, I hope I pronounce your name very good. Thank you very much. I'm just going to start with the rapporteur of women, because we know that the women is actually, we have this year a very special session for women and children, actually. And I'm going to start with you. This is one of the innovations of this year, actually, to integrate these women and children. And I'm going to ask you, what should be done to further advance the position of the women for 2015, after 2015?
Thanks very much. I really want to thank the ISC for this innovation, for creating rapporteurs on both women and children. I think it's an important addition and one that I hope will continue, and we really honor that. And all of my comments represent very inclusive, broad input from women and some valiant men from across the entire CSD days. I understand that the first round we're going to focus sort of on wording and messaging. And so I want to start by something that has come up consistently, which is that a gender analysis of migration is comprehensive. It's not about looking only at migrant women. It looks at women in situations in their home countries and what development would look like that would enable them to choose to stay at home. It looks at women in transit, it looks at women in destination countries, and it looks at women who are returning home. And there's another category that I learned in these couple days, which is a new group of mothers of the disappeared. That phrase was related to women in Argentina during the dirty wars, and now we're hearing about mothers of the disappeared from Eritrea, from Mexico, going to countries to try to find their lost ones. So women are in a broad array of categories. Also, gender explores the differential roles and power that women have. And the most fundamental one is that women are forced to play all of the caregiving roles in society. So they do that as unpaid work, your grandmother, your mother, you as in parenting, and then that gets translated into paid work in service economies where women are hyper exploited. So in terms of wording, we need to look at gender. We need to look at the multiple roles women play. And the last thing I really want to underscore is that much of the discourse about women in the current conversations about migration and development put women in a victim role. You see the images of, drastic, desperate women, pathetic, and that actually leads to policies about how do we rescue women. Sometimes those policies do more harm than good. We're very, very clear in saying that women need to be, women are the protagonists of change, they're agents of change. Migrant women are involved in significant ways in social movements and organizations for claiming rights. And what we need states to be engaged in is affirming the spaces and the legal structures in which migrant women can claim rights, rather than trying to step in and rescue them as victims.
Thank you. If I come back this, did you have any wording or quotes come out for your sessions, the sessions that you participate? Is there any quotes come out?
Absolutely, but are we going to do 3 rounds? I'm not clear on the structure. I thought we were going to come back to recommendations.
No, okay, but I wanted to give you already your space to discuss these things, because there are questions that we are asking, but we have taken the women as a special session, so just
okay, all right. Sorry, we've crossed signals, so I'm happy to continue. Absolutely. We have some broad recommendations that came up consistently from every session, and then I have one recommendation from each workshop to mention. Recommendations are the necessity of the expansion of safe channels for migration, the focus on labor and decent work, which impacts women in significant ways, that women must be able to claim claim their status, migration status, independent of spouses or employers. They should not be tied to spouses and employers. That the state has the obligation to prevent, promote, and protect women's rights to freedom from violence. We hear about violence against women as both the cause and part of reality of women in migration. That includes gender-based violence, state violence, structural post-war violence, xenophobic attacks, and institutional violence. And the state has the obligation to promote, protect. We feel that women need the freedom to speak out and organize to defend their rights, and that we need to actively support human rights defenders, both in countries of origin who may be defending themselves against land grabbing, and in places where migrant women are speaking out and organizing. We need to defend human rights defenders. Women need access to sexual and reproductive health regardless of migration status, and they need access to social services and justice regardless of status. And there needs to be a firewall between these services and any migration enforcement, so that a woman who is seeking justice because of experiencing domestic violence shouldn't have to fear that migration authorities are going to deport her for claiming, for denouncing that and seeking justice. So very quickly, in the SDG conversation, we felt like we need to work on effective indicators where migration is referenced across all of the SDGs as well as gender, but that needs to be accompanied by advocacy to address the contradictions within the SDGs themselves, which support a growth model and a development model of hyper-consumption and production of a circular migration model that in fact undermines women's rights and migrant rights. We talked about, in terms of engagement, popular education programs that would empower women at the very local level to articulate what their needs and demands are regarding development, and to build an agenda that could strengthen social movements that would really be able to hold governments accountable. And we suggested that ratification and implementation of both the Migrant Rights Convention and CEDAW should be part of SDG measurable indicators. How many countries have signed should be one of the things they're measured on in terms of SDG fulfillment. Regarding forced migration, we said that existing definitions of refugees and asylum seekers do not address the multiple causes of forced migration. We're living in an antiquated system that doesn't respond to the realities that we're experiencing now. So a focus just on criminalizing smugglers ignores the reasons that people will take any risk to leave their countries. Returning migrants to dangerous situations or militarizing borders and extending borders into third countries is not going to stem the flows. Women seeking refuge should not be criminalized. So we also underscored that the very, very welcome SDG commitment to safe, orderly, and legal migration must be made in the context of migrants' human rights, regardless of status. It can't be used by states as an excuse to further criminalize those who come under irregular channels. Regarding labor mobility, we have clearly affirmed the Migrant Rights Convention and CEDAW and related international human rights treaties, and all of the ILO conventions that touch on women and migrant rights. We want to establish and maintain adequate channels for regular labor mobility in response to real labor demand at all skill levels, including so-called unskilled levels where many women are, and for the regularization of migrants in irregular situations. In particular, full implementation by member states of established free movement regimes within regional economic communities.
Carol, I think your time,
last one.
Your time is up.
Okay.
There are also another rapporteurs, and we need to hear also their recommendation, things that come out of the session. So thank you. You have given a lot of time. So there are 3 questions that we are going to ask you, all the rapporteurs, and I think this question is everybody has 2 minutes to just take the things that come out of the session. So the question is that I'm going to ask you is what wording and stronger quotes come out of the session? That's one question. The other question is, what are the 2 most critical issues identified during your working session? And can you give an example what global, regional, national solution were put for the change of policy and practice? Yeah. And the third question is, what next? What the action is do we need to take as a civil society and together with the government to make it happen? That is 3 questions that we need you for 2 minutes. Just we have 2 minutes. I'm sorry. We give time for women. We know women is very important. I am a woman, and we give them. Children will be also given a time to say a lot. But these 3 questions is very important to know. And I'm just going to start with group 1 with Rodolov. What is your answer?
Is it working? Yeah, cool. I'm going to speak in Spanish to spice it up a little bit. So if you can use your headphones, thanks. Relacionado a la primera pregunta, algunas frases que surgieron, se relaciona con lo que decía Carol, ¿no? Y quiero subrayar ese mensaje. La migración forzada es consecuencia de este modelo económico y tenemos que cambiar ese modelo y redefinir el modelo de desarrollo para no enfocarse únicamente en una perspectiva de crecimiento económico, ¿no? Como lo sugieren los objetivos de desarrollo sustentable. Otra frase que surgió un par de veces, incluso una referencia a Einstein, es que no todo lo que se puede contar cuenta y no todo lo que cuenta es debidamente contado, cuando hablábamos de indicadores. Eso significa que cuando hablamos de indicadores tenemos que tomar elementos cuantitativos y cualitativos, también incluir perspectiva de derechos a la hora de medir. En términos de recomendaciones, surgieron varias, están en el reporte, menciono 3. La primera es la generación de alianzas entre diferentes sectores para generar este debate de cambiar el modelo, pero al mismo tiempo generar espacios de diálogo donde la participación de la sociedad civil sea vinculante para la implementación y el monitoreo y evaluación de la implementación de los ODS. Todos los objetivos son importantes, son relevantes y se tienen que generar indicadores relacionados con migrantes, sus familias y comunidades para todos los 169 metas de los 16 objetivos de los ODS. 3, la relevancia de generar una coherencia institucional en todos los países a nivel nacional. Es importante dar vuelta a esas políticas de seguritización de la migración. Y otro tema que fue muy importante y que surgió repetidamente en los 2 días es la relevancia de que la sociedad civil sigamos recopilando información y esa información sirva para nutrir las políticas públicas de los países y sirva para medir también el progreso que se hace en la implementación de los ODS y de las políticas. En términos de recomendaciones en el corto plazo, pensando en el siguiente foro en 2016, subrayar de nuevo la ratificación de la Convención de 1990, el Convenio 189 de la OIT y otros que ya se mencionaron. En el corto plazo, en el tema de indicadores, en el marco de los ODS, hay una ronda todavía de negociación entre los diferentes estados, por lo menos de aquí a marzo, en donde un grupo técnico estará trabajando en ese tema y después, entendemos, se pasará a la Asamblea General. 1 minute, 30 seconds. Y ese es un espacio de oportunidad importante. Y por último, es importante que los estados reporten los primeros avances de implementación de los ODS en el siguiente foro mundial, en Bangladesh. No podemos, ya está aprobada la agenda, hay que mostrar acción y ese es un primer corte desde donde estaremos viendo esos avances, ¿no? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maria? Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, the 3 questions that I have asked, I would like to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatuma, for the introduction. Inspiring quotes, inspiring words, of course. There were many. I had to choose 2. The first one is taken from The Wall of Dreams that you have all seen, and that was recalled by John Bingham. You have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. The second quote I've chosen is showing a bit more what we can do, what do we have to do, what our role is about it. And this was mentioned by Martín Martínez, so I'm going to read it in Spanish. Tenemos que trabajar en humanizar a los gobiernos, en humanizar a las migraciones. Nos hemos olvidado que somos seres humanos. And I think that this is one of the key points that really came out of a leitmotif of our session. Now, I've been asked to provide 2 key recommendations. I am going to indulge myself and provide you with 3. But I will link them to action points, so I hope I will save time there. The first recommendation, I chosen 3 because we had 2 sessions, but one of the 3 recommendations came up in both sessions. And this is the first one. It's the need to challenge a crisis approach to managing migration, especially when we talk about forced migration. It is crucial to provide long-term sustainable solutions to migration and to offer the possibility for migrants to access the labor market, to access integration programs, to access services, and to access family reunification. How can this be done? There were a couple of very practical action points that were linked to this recommendation in both sessions. One of them is to establish 2 multi-stakeholders platform. one to be focused on policies on forced migration, and the second one to be focused on actions on forced migration. Multi-stakeholders to encompass local authorities, civil society organizations, but also international organizations and migrants themselves, of course. The second suggestion was to consider a broadening of the scope of the 1951 UN Convention on relating to the status of refugees, so as to cover also forced migrants. So this is something to be discussed. As for the second recommendation, and this is also very crucial, and I heard it came out also in other sessions, is the need to recognize, strengthen, and protect the role of civil society organizations. We've heard very worrying testimonies of colleagues who are human rights defenders and whose work is hindered every day by laws and policies that are criminalizing their work. So of course the action point is to strengthen and empower civil society organizations and abolish those laws that criminalize humanitarian assistance. The third and final recommendations is that development is not only economic development, but it should also be considered as human development. In this sense, the recommendation is that it is crucial to grant access to education as a fundamental right. And the action point will be the establishment of monitoring systems of access to education at different level, so global, national, but also regional level, to see if education is granted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think your 2 minutes already finished. Thank you. Charlie, finding IFLO, labor mobility and labor rights and decent work. What is the points come out for your session? Yes. 2 minutes also.
Okay, thank you. So the phrase that stuck with me, I pulled from this Sunday's organizing meeting of the People's Global Action, which is that they want the hands or the head, which is a description of state policies and analyses that seek only the labor, whether manual or intellectual, of migrants rather than the entirety of the human being of migrants. So this framework justifies a lot of the problems we see in employment policies and labor recruitment, and an abdication of responsibility among states to promote decent work, to enforce labor rights, and it justifies migration programs that deny families the right to stay together. They deny the right to raise children. They tie workers to employers, and that leads to all kinds of abuses. And likewise, it leads to development strategies based on migrant remittances rather than job creations. So we looked at strategies and initiatives in civil society and recommendations to states to change this framework. And not surprisingly, the very first recommendation is the enforcement of core labor standards. In destination country, that means there's no discrimination, that labor laws cover every worker, whether documented or not. And there's a firewall between immigration enforcement and labor law enforcement. And in origin countries, this is something that isn't talked about enough, is labor law enforcement is so important for development. So many workers are forced from their communities because their jobs aren't good, because they're not getting overtime, because they're having their wages stolen, because there's discrimination in the workplace, because they're harassed or there's violence against them for trying to organize a union. So the enforcement of core labor standards is fundamental. On recruitment, this came up in both sessions. There needs to be policy coherence between origin and destination countries. Toward the establishment of registries for recruitment firms, to work together to eliminate fees, to eliminate a race to the bottom in the cost of labor among origin countries, and importantly, to bring transparency to the recruitment chain. This is something that came up for both civil society and the private sector. And on that, I think something that is important to everyone here is cleaning up supply chains. So we need to be supporting and working to improve and implement corporate CSR industry initiatives and multi-stakeholder initiatives, work within them to improve them, improve the implementation. And there needs to be more cooperation and dialogue between civil society, trade unions, governments, and the private sector. And we need access to justice. That's another fundamental point, and that needs to be portable. So workers who are fired, who are threatened deportation for speaking out at work, shouldn't go homeless, shouldn't be in a shelter at a consulate waiting for justice in destination countries. They should be able to go home. They should be able to get back wages in their own communities at home. And finally, mobility is absolutely fundamental to all of this, and that's mobility in the labor market in destination countries, so you're not tied to an employer, you're not dependent on that job to avoid being deported, but that also means mobility within regional blocks, gradual implementation of mobility to eliminate the need for these crazy recruitment frameworks for change of labor brokers and temporary work visa programs.
Yeah. Thank you.
Real quick, just a couple more points. So as civil society, the way forward as civil society, we need to continue to agitate, mobilize, and build coalitions, because a lot of these coalitions already exist. We need to broaden them and deepen them. We're working everywhere. We're organizing domestic workers into unions, migrant workers into unions. We're building alliances across borders, transnationally. We're working with the private sector. We're taking on these initiatives in supply chains. So that needs to be here at the GFMD. We need to have a space where we can all sit down at the same table with governments, not separate, all of us together, employers, workers, civil society, and governments, looking for a way forward, looking to end these abuses in labor mobility.
Thank you. Partnership is something that's coming out of the session. Thank you. Rachel, Robtel, I have to say, Robtel, and SOS, University of London, Migration and Diaspora Empowerment and Action for Human Development. What are the answers to those questions?
Sure, I'm going to be speaking about both the xenophobia working session as well as diaspora and migration one today. I think one of the things that really came out that struck a chord with me is the notion that context matters in every single instance. And when we were having a discussion around xenophobia, one of the things that came out of the discussion is that xenophobia happens within a particular context, and there's a historical trajectory of slavery, colonialism, racial domination, as well as neoliberal economic development that we see in contemporary times now. It doesn't happen within a vacuum. It's also important to remember that the experiences of largely migrants of color in the global north is quite different from white migrants in the global south. So that experience of, again, colonialism, slavery, and racial domination has an impact on how migrants are perceived and received in countries of settlement. One of the other things that came out during the discussion is asking ourselves, would we have responded differently if the Syrian 3-year-old migrant boy who was washed ashore, that image that struck a chord with all of us, would we have responded differently if it had been a 3-year-old sub-Saharan African girl? Another quote that came up that I thought was incredibly important is, a child is a child is a child. There's no such thing as an illegal child. From the migration and diaspora panel, there's often an assumption that diasporas are the panacea for socioeconomic development in their countries of origin. And two of the quotes that I pulled up from that particular session is that diasporas are not magicians. They cannot make magic. And then also, diasporas are not the panacea for socioeconomic development in their countries of origin, because the assumption that they are, policies and practices around diasporas often create tensions with local communities who may not necessarily have the same kinds of support that diasporas may have. In terms of recommendations, there were quite a number of them. I think one of the things that I thought was particularly important as it relates to xenophobic attacks or xenophobia around migrants is to create national curricula around international and national migration trajectories, so that people understand that migration, again, is not something that happens within a vacuum. It has a long historical trajectory that all of us sort of have experienced. And so national governments have to take on that as a priority, to create national curricula around what it means as it relates to migration histories. I think another recommendation that came up was civil society organizations, governments, as well as private sector entities have to work on transforming the language against migration, particularly what we call, in quotes, illegal migration, so that we're talking about undocumented workers or irregular migrants as opposed to illegal migrants. Because that term, illegal, connotes all kinds of xenophobic tendencies in people, where people feel like it is a threat in many ways. I think another recommendation that came out of the diaspora panel is that governments have to align migration initiatives or migrant diaspora specific initiatives with country of origin development programs. They're often happening in silos. So diasporas work on their own initiatives, and then they don't necessarily align with country of origin development initiatives that are supported by private sector or even development cooperation partners. Another important recommendation that came out was that it's important to match the support of migrant and diaspora-led initiatives, social enterprise initiatives, with local socioeconomic development initiatives. So those tensions that we talked about during the session between local actors and diaspora migrant actors aren't compounded. In terms of way forwards, there were a few concrete recommendations that came out in terms of way forward between now and the next GFMD. The first is the Migration and Development Civil Society Network, MADE as we know it, should coordinate a global network or working group on migration that responds to xenophobic tendencies across the globe, that incorporates civil society organizations as well as chambers of commerce, media, host governments, academics, and trade unions as well. Another way forward that I thought was particularly important was around the idea of civil society organizations formulating or formalizing relationships with the media, because one of the things that came out during this discussion is that there are a lot of public awareness campaigns that limit or humanize migrants in such a way that it's difficult to dehumanize them and attack them through xenophobic intentions. So formalizing a relationship with media institutions nationally as well as regionally around migration trajectory. So what does it mean to be a migrant resettling in a country of settlement such that they aren't received with this sort of notion of being threats?
Thank you very much. I heard that media outreach is very important there. So every recommendation that we have to change the perspective of the migration into the countries that we are. So media outreach is very, very important, and we have to come out and show actually the positive image of the migration and development. I'm just I'm handed over Ignacio to do the reporting of the children. So thank you.
Say it loud! Sorry. Yeah, but Carl, really very happy that you have been here. Actually, Carl is from an organization that was created I think just before the GFMD in Stockholm, and it's a youth group called 1/3. Perhaps you can tell us why 1/3, and I let you say also what's the role that you have here, and then we'll go on also rapidly with the same 3 questions as the other rapporteurs have had. Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello? No. All right.
Yeah.
So first of all, I want to thank you so much for having me here, and also like having me, letting me be here as a youth, and actually also not just having me here as a children rapporteur, but also letting a youth being a children rapporteur. So I come from 1/3, Sweden, which was actually created after the last GFMD in Sweden, because we were a group of youth who wanted to gather youth perspectives regarding migration, and then after the GFMD, some of us continued because we thought it was really important to gather youth perspectives regarding migration.
So you've been doing the same as Carol has been doing, also with the team and collecting different elements that have come on in the different groups. Just the same, and I let you go through the 3 questions that the other rapporteurs have had. And by the way, thank you very much for the rapporteurs, the way you've reported. And why are we leaving the youth the last one? I don't understand. Yeah. It's all the question of seniority, isn't it? Yeah. Go ahead. The wording first.
The wording. Yes. I thought it was, in general, first of all, before I go into children, I thought they were... Oh, all right. I thought there were quite a few interesting things that caught my attention during these few days. First of all, actually how the discourse is actually changing in how migration is being framed. How, for example, we're using the word crisis, which, or some are, which I personally isn't a big fan of. But in regards of children, something else that caught my attention, and more specifically, was how one can say children, for example, left behind, or children remaining behind. These small differences, things can make a huge difference actually, because in my opinion, as well, that came out from one of the sessions, left has more of a negative connotation. I think so often the children aren't actually abandoned. Sometimes it can actually be seen as a measure to protect the child. So that's actually, that was one of the things that caught my attention. But in general also, during the sessions, I actually noticed that statistics were being used sometimes. And I think a lot of, maybe perhaps you agree with me, but statistics usually stay silent in us. I think, as we heard yesterday, the example of Aylan, for example, and the testimony by Albuquerque, I think those are the things that we're going to remember during these civil society days here. And I think it was you, Ignacio, who said that Aylan, he could have been your child, your boy. He could have been perhaps your child, but he could also have been my brother. So it's, in that way, it gives a really strong message when giving anecdotes, for example. And for example, also the poem that we heard, and as well, the paint, something that hasn't actually been mentioned like throughout speaking. It's actually the paintings downstairs. I don't know if you've noticed them, but actually how they also represent children. And that's been their way of representing their voices during these days. So, yeah.
Okay. The recommendations, and you go to the recommendations and the step forwards. Yeah.
So the second question.
Yeah, you do deliver everything in one go. You go through the recommendations and the step forwards.
All right.
We have 2 minutes, actually, 2 minutes for every rapporteur, so we give you more than 3 minutes. So
all right.
You can say very short.
Oh my God, okay, sorry.
Thank you.
No pressure.
Okay, but first of all, I think it's the bridging documents that you presented before these days were. I want to thank you first of all for that, but because I think it's been very important to integrate the child rights perspective during these sessions and throughout the days. Unfortunately, you only touched upon these questions to different extents, of course, but I think they've been. It was hard to go in depth because perhaps the lack of the time, but I think more needs to be done, perhaps for the next GFMD. In order to highlight the importance of including the child rights perspective. So that's very important indeed. And also, there were a few things that actually caught my attention in how giving children a voice. Usually, perhaps you have a certain knowledge that I, for example, don't have. I'm only 21. But I believe children who do migrate, they have a different kind of knowledge, the knowledge that you get through experience. And I think that's extremely valuable and something that we need to take into consideration when actually making policies, and so that we can actually understand what's needed in order for to maximize the well-being of every child in the world. Yeah. So there was many discussions about, for example, xenophobia and how we can tackle that, and how you can do that through, for example, education at a young age, and also how role models can inspire youth and children, of course, in many different ways, and also through sports and meeting places, and throughout, their whole when they grow up, not only school but like in the society as all time, the whole time.
Yeah, that's,
So
that's great. I think you've done a good
Sorry.
job. I have to thank everybody, every rapporteur. You have done amazing work, and I say thank you very much. Thank you. It is great to have you here. It's great that contribution that you have done. I think we've got everybody have a written recommendations and reports of those the rapporteurs, and I think they have done a good job. And everybody, thank you. I'm just calling Essen for a Turkish GFD representative to make some report. Thank you. You can stay. Essen, and having listened to some of the minutes and conclusions and actions put forward for civil societies, what issue did you think will be taken up during the DHG 2015 Government Summit and Common Space? What are the priority issues on this global GFMD agenda? And what are priorities for the government of Turkey? Thank you. That's the question.
Microphone designing. Thank you very much. Yes, this is my second time, I think, in 2 days here speaking to you, and I really get pleasure to be with you. It's really a more, the government side is a little bit more stressful, I think, so you are discussing in a fine manner. Thank you for the invitation first, and thanks for all the rapporteurs. Really very interesting. I'm very happy to hear your feedback, and especially you discuss women, of course, and children. They are very, very important also for us. And thanks for your attention on these two topics. As you know, the first meeting of the GFMD took place in Brussels in 2007, and from this very first meeting, civil society was always a part of the GFMD, although I believe it took a few years for good communication to be established between the government and civil society meetings. But now I see that, and the first, I have to emphasize that, the first common space session was held in Greece in 2009. So now I feel that as the chair of the GFMD, our communication is much, much better, I think. And in the future, I am sure that the incoming chair, Bangladesh, and then the other chairs will also pursue this policy. I believe also that the civil society days have led the way on a theme that will carry through the Common Space and Government Summit in all of our discussions and inside events. And that theme is to need to take action. Of course, discussions are very important, though we know that GFMD is not a binding structure. We cannot have any in the summit, in the government side. We cannot have any documents, any legal binding conclusions. But still, even you, when you discuss, and your discussions are very valuable, but also we need action, because these migration issues are getting very important on the agenda, and it attracts the attention of all states, not only one region. It's not a problem of only one region or only one country. It's really a problem of all of us, all the international community. So your discussions and our discussions within the government process, very valuable, but we need to take some action. Even though the GFMD is not a body, as I have already explained you, that can take binding decisions, but it cannot be just about talk. These will continue our discussions to be items on our action agenda. But I think that there is a lot more potential for action to address the issues that concern all GFMD participants, both civil society and governments, and also for partnerships between them. And another overarching themes that bridge the civil society days and the common space and the government summit is the need for our partnership. Because when we have this, our partnership, common space, civil society, and the government side, we are sure that we will have more fruitful results. These two themes, action and partnership, need to be anchored in specific programs and lead to real outcomes that make a difference in the lives of migrants. The GFMD has pushed forward several issues that governments and civil society can continue to help translate into action. Civil society at the GFMD has long argued for expanding the idea of protecting and assisting migrants in countries in crisis to migrants in crisis and migrants in transit. The tragedies that we have witnessed these last 2 years in the Mediterranean, Gulf of Aden, and the Bay of Bengal, as well as on the land routes, have shown how important this is. The discussions you started in the civil society days on how to protect the rights and ensure the safety of migrants as they travel will continue at the Common Space and the Government Summit. I am sure that the participants here will come away with the ideas and motivation to address this critical issue. Really, it's very critical, and lots of people, they can be migrants, but they are first people, human beings. They lost their lives in the Mediterranean recently, and I'm sure that now, at this moment, still maybe some migrants are still there struggling with the waves in the seas, maybe in the Southeast Asia, maybe in the Mediterranean. Another area for action in partnership that cuts across all the elements of the GFMD is the imperative to lower the human and the financial costs of migration. We have, I'm sure, that made progress on these issues too, in partnership with international organizations like the World Bank, and also especially the discussions already held in the G20, which took up the need to reduce remittance costs several years ago. Now, as you are aware, Turkey is chairing the G20 this year also. Several ideas for ethical recruitment of migrant labor have been deployed, also in the context of the GFMD. Progress on recruitment has the potential to reduce both human and financial costs for migrants. And we think that many of us attending the GFMD in 2015 from civil society, government, international organizations have a sense that something important was achieved in getting several targets, especially on migration, included in the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. We also in the GFMD government side, and I'm sure that you as the civil society really worked very hard in order to include these migration issues, relevant issues to the SDGs. And today we are very happy and pleased, and I am sure all of us, that really a lot has been achieved. And so now what difficult part is coming in the head of us, the implementation. So we have to all focus on these SDGs, especially from the perspective of migration. And we are happy to announce that this forum, GFMD forum, together with you, with the civil society, is the first international event just after this SDGs acceptance. So we should also use this opportunity. We believe that it's very important. And finally, I want to mention another bridge between the civil society days and the government side. I think the subject of forced migration must be very much of everyone's mind, especially since we are meeting here in Turkey, where we host more than 2 million Syrians and Iraqis. I am sure maybe in Istanbul, when you go around, I am sure you have already met Syrians in the streets in some places. So we should, of course, discuss this issue, and of course, 50% of Syrians who fled from their homes are in Turkey, but other 50% are in Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq. So we should really focus on this issue, the forced migration. The Turkish chair, for the first time in GFMD government history, we have a round table 3.1 where we discuss this forced migration issue. And these, of course, some kinds of solutions can be found for these millions of people forced to leave their countries, whether by war, repression, or any other factors beyond their control. These solutions must be found in the connection between migration and development, and the positive potential of human mobility, the overarching themes of the Global Forum. So we look forward in the next days to continuing the work you have done yesterday and today. And speaking for the Turkish chair, we appreciate the positive and practical spirit that you have shown and feel sure that it will lead to many positive outcomes for migrants. Thank you very much, and I hope to see all of you in common space tomorrow. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We hear about the action is partnership, and we hope that it will come in the future, beyond 2015. And we have to realize that SDGs and make realize. Thank you. We are now, I'm handing over the Ignacio, who will lead the panel coming. So,
yeah, thank you very much,
yeah.
Fatima.
Thank you.
We have a few minutes just to, to stretch the legs while we're going to be inviting the people for the panel to come over. We have to switch the microphones. And then we're heading for please be seated. And then, unfortunately, I have to remind this symbol, which means the time going by. Eh? So welcome to the concluding debate. Can I invite the ones who want a private conversation to do it outside then? Okay, thanks. For the concluding debate, realizing development beyond 2015 for migrants and their communities. What do we do now? And here again we have mathematics, 6 panelists, too little time, but we're going to try our best. Eh? Thank you very much for all of you for being here. I'm going to do a short introduction, and then one by one, each panelist is going to give some inputs on what to do now, where we're heading for. And then try and squeeze in some time for comments from the audience, but don't be surprised if we don't manage it. Now, what are the pathways for change? What are the needed change efforts that we should be bringing, not only from the others, but also from us as civil society? We come with a set of beliefs and of assumptions about how change should happen. It's difficult also to be able to discuss about all this, and we have to sharpen our thinking, not only to stop any reversals of where we have got to, but for major changes to be achieved along the way. I repeat what was said yesterday in the panel discussion we had. The NGO world is a vital player in this moment of history. There has never been another moment when the nexus between civil society and governments has been so important. And that was from Mr. Peter Sutherland. So which tactics, and I said tactics, should we be undertaking, and in which situations? Are we not sometimes running like headless chickens? Running after too many things at a time, not sufficiently focused? Are we really finding the short path for a long distance? Is our attention not being taken away from binding legal frameworks to a la carte agenda? In doing so, are we not sometimes even obstructing, slowing things, badly representing our constituencies? We often need game changers. Mrs. Altuk said we need action. She had a call for action there. And action is going to happen with game changes, with looking for short paths to go a long way. My feeling is also that we refrain from giving ourselves a good tap in the back and celebrate even if little victories. We learn from success, and I think we're afraid that celebration is indecent, considering the amount of change we have not yet achieved, or can be interpreted that we are satisfied of where we are. We, who's we? We is us, a movement. But we is also connected to many different, diverse movements, but often working in unity. The People's Global Action, for instance, is an essential part of these movements. From this session, we want to debate on game changers, on tactics, on short paths. We want to discuss on what's coming next. We want to discuss on the words and the call that Mrs. Altuk had. We need action, but how? Not to be running like headless chickens. So I would start by you, Thomas, but I have to say Thomas Gass. We did Schmolik, so we can say Thomas and Ignacio. So Thomas is Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And I was wondering, how do you do for your visiting card? Or do you just put SGPCIAAUNDESA? You have a wide-ranging experience in bilateral and multilateral development cooperation. Amongst others, you served recently for 4 years in Nepal. The United Nations is celebrating 70 years. The question is simple: is it fit for purpose? And especially with the focus on migration and development.
Thank you very much, Ignatius, Fatima. Thank you for having me here. You know, you asked what are the game changers and what is changing. I mean, firstly, the challenges are not going to go away. The challenges are there. The other thing that's not going to go away is the fear of others, the fact that fear brings out the worst in us and brings about fences and walls and all these other expressions of our weaknesses. But something has changed, and this is a silver lining, let's say, on this cloud, and the UN definitely has opened its doors to civil society for this process leading up to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I believe that this strong interaction, the accountability and the scrutiny that led up to, I think has helped to release some of the emotional intelligence of this community of nations, and has let the values speak rather than the fear for a moment. We have to hold on to that, and I believe in order to do that, we have to realize what is it that actually happened here. And what happened was that basically we moved from what was a strategic plan to address some of the most pressing issues in developing countries, the MDGs. We moved to a shared vision of humanity. A shared vision of humanity that will be measured differently, and that has a commitment at its basis, which I think is fundamental and is very, very operational. And that is the commitment to leave no one behind. We have to realize what that means. It means that we can't hide behind averages anymore in the future. It means that we have to start our strategic action by identifying the most vulnerable and understanding why they are vulnerable and what can change that vulnerability. It's extremely practical, and it has something to do for the UN and for any other organization in the field. Finally, the other very practical consequence is that it is shifting from basically an outcome of development cooperation. I mean, sustainable development has basically been redefined. Before it was an outcome of development cooperation. Now it has to become an outcome of a more effective dialogue and interaction between duty bearers and rights holders. Yeah. And this is something that we all have to get into. I mean, are we fit for purpose? Not yet. We have to become fit for purpose, and we have to learn the lessons from what is happening there.
Yeah. Can you say perhaps a bit more, because I think it is a great celebration, where we've got to with the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, the way the wording of rights is in there, and the huge and important role that the UN has played in there. But yesterday morning we had a panel about root causes, and if we just look at the neighboring country here, Syria, is there not reforms that are needed at the UN Security Council, for instance, at the UN? Are we not driving a Volkswagen, no, what's an old car? I don't know, a deux chevaux, and we have to take more speed with a different type of vehicle?
I think you're right that there are certainly a number of very, very important issues that escape the simple implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. But that doesn't mean, for the first time, we have 169 elements of what it means to leave no one behind. I mean, this is huge. And we need to integrate that into our strategies. We need to integrate that into the dialogues that people have with their leaders, with their local authorities, with their parliamentarians, with their service providers. And then I think things might slowly change. And in the UN, and I'm not sure whether we'll get back to that, so maybe I should just say it. I mean, we have to make sure that the monitoring and the review of these Sustainable Development Goals is an open process. A process where everyone can participate, and a process where we apply the lessons learned from how we managed to get such ambitious goals in the first place.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas. We get back to you in a moment. Fingers crossed. Mr. Saidul Hadi. Shaidul, sorry for that. You're serving as the Foreign Secretary of the government of Bangladesh. Thank you very much for being with us. And amongst many appointments where you were elected, if I'm not mistaken, last year as an independent expert to the committee.
My chairman is sitting.
Your chairman is sitting there. And to the Committee on the Rights of All Migrants, Workers and Members of their Families. So very much welcome in this session. And given that your government is organizing the next Global Forum on Migration and Development, given also that already for many years your government has been playing a leading role in including migrants and migration in the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, we would like to very much hear from you of the different perspectives of what Bangladesh is thinking of leading to December 2016, where you will be hosting the next Global Forum in Dhaka.
Thank you very much. It is indeed pleasure to be with friends and colleagues. Before that, can I answer? Because the question is, what do we now? I think we need to transform the world of migration and migrants. So that's what we should look at. We should dream, we should have the courage to transform the world of migration and migrants by 2030. That's what the Secretary General asked us to believe, and that's what we all are working towards. Now, is it possible to transform the world? And here I'm sort of narrowing the focus rather than looking at the broader sustainable development goal to the migrants' issues. And I think, yes, it is possible. It is possible, and this is not something I'm just saying because I'm here. I've been working with the civil society for the last 20 years in the field of migration. And I've seen how the civil society has led the states into the stage where we are right now. State was much behind. And I think states still behind civil society in leading some of the sustainable development goal, and in particular migration and the climate change. Mm-hmm. And that's where the hope is. And that's why I have made an effort to be with them here. Now, the question is, how do we do it? The rallying point that I see within the SDGs, and you said game changer, I call it windows. The goal 13, the whole issue of inequality, I think the whole issue of inequality has featured out quite prominently in the last 3 years. We realize it's not the question of looking technically on how we can provide all the basic services to the people. It's a question much more fundamental, whether we can address the inequality at the state level, at the society level, at the global level. And that's where the window is, and migration has been placed there. And it is not something by chance. We had some of the countries rallied together and fought. And here I would like to mention about Switzerland and Sweden and some of the other countries. It is possible. And the other one, which I think we have to really think and see how we can do it, is goal 16. We cannot have transformed the world of migration unless we look at the governance issue. So if you combine the two, then you get a bigger picture through which we can transform the world of migration. And then comes in the whole issue of rights. The migration came in, if you look at Agenda 21, if you look at, I've been tracking the all 10 global processes and institutions that is evolved. Some are yet to take a proper shape, including the humanitarian summit in this country. If you look at that, you will see that that if you combine the two, and then we can take it forward, it will change, and the rights would be the fundamental. And that is the window through which it has emerged. And it wasn't easy. There was last-minute drops here and there, including the whole issue of Goal 13. So that's where we need to look at. What we need to do, we have to look at different kinds of doing things. If you want to transform, in a regular process, we cannot transform it. And that's where the hope is civil society. They have to really have the courage and think out of the box and lead the states to change it. So this is what I think we need to look at and have a bigger dream to change transform the world. In Bangladesh chairmanship, chairmanship, we have decided, we have proposed, and that we will try and see how we can start a process of transforming the world of migration and migrant by 2030. We'll start the process, and Germany will take, and then others will take it, but we'll start the process, because I think starting is extremely important, because all the countries this year and next year will be looking at how they position themselves in terms of indicators. I know it has not been the most ideal negotiated text. It has never been, nowhere. Currently, we are struggling with the climate change displacement issues, which is much more saddening to see the new text. But what I'm suggesting is that during the Bangladesh time, we'll have 3 sub-themes. We'll go back. What is the economics of migration and development? Some of the very fundamental basic things, based on which the world of migration moves. Under that, we would look at what it costs for the families, for the migrants themselves. Is it still movement by choice or the forced movement? First. Then we look at, there's something fundamentally reshaping the world of business and the trade, which is connectivity. The world is getting reshaped, the business world. Where is services? Where is migrants? Migrants are at the center of business, and we would bring that under the umbrella of economics of migration. Then the second sub-theme is sociology of migration. Still, it is individuals move. It is individual who decides whether I will move or I wouldn't move. And the process is pretty complicated. We would like to look at that particular process and try and bring out what motivates people to jump into the sea and what that prevents them from taking a risky migration. We have to look at, and this is a very touchy, very difficult issue, but we have to look at, and we will try and do that. Now, the third area that we will look at, some of the states still continue to deal with migration issue as if we are in 40s, in 50s and 60s, 70s and 80s. We are not there. We have moved far, far beyond. The whole governance structure for the states have changed, and it's changing very fast. But how about migration governance? Mr. Peter Sutherland has been saying it for a couple of years. We have been saying it in our commission, that we cannot sit in that commission and continue to talk about migrants' rights, assuming that the whole world is listening. The whole world is not listening. So that's where we would like to look at. I think we are proposing to change the governance structure at the country level, at the regional level, possibly at the global level. Let's start the beginning, and that will transform the world of migration by 2030. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to get back to that last point, because you also had a call to civil society, and we need that. Think out of the box. Eh? That's what you've just told us, and it's really important, but it's not easy. Eh? The question of governance, what call do you have for us? Because we work with this. This is the 5-year action plan to work with governments that came out of the high-level dialogue from civil society. And in our point number 6, there is the question of governance. How should we be getting engaged in the coming months, leading to you in Bangladesh who really want to talk about this and talk about this question of governance? Tell us, how should we move on up to December 2016, where we are with you talking about governance?
As I said, that Bangladesh should be the chair for 2016. Certainly, we'll have just limited 1 year. But we'd like to start a process, a dialogue during our chairmanship with all of you, and that's why I'm here. I think civil society has shown us the way. I'm representing a government, but I nevertheless say the inspiration, the dream has to come from the civil society, especially on a migration issues. There we are still very conservative. Yeah. State is very control freak, including Bangladesh. But here the civil society has shown us the brighter side of migration. They'll have to show us how it will at the end be beneficial for all if we have the courage to change it. Because we cannot govern migration with the instrument that were put in place in 15, 60s, 70s. It's no longer functioning. We see around us. It's not functioning in our part of the world. We are almost overwhelmed by the crisis, and we don't know what to do and what to do. So we have to get light from the civil society, and I mean it. And there are countries where civil society has led in this. We have seen it in Europe. Look what has happened. It has set a tremendous example where the civil society literally took over the whole issue of mobility in Europe. We have seen it in our part of the world, where villages started feeding in Vietnam, in Malaysia, and other places. The NGOs came in and said that, look, okay, you do yourself, but we're going to take care of them, the stranded migrants. So that's what we're going to do. The question is, let's talk about some fundamentals of governance. In this house, there are a lot of experts. I can see some of them. They have been talking about it, we were not listening. So time has come when I think we have the appetite to listen this day. So we have to have that discussion. And, whenever we talk about governance, the history of implementing governance is somehow or other has not been very, very comfortable, even for countries in Asia, in Africa. But the narrative is different. The governance that we're talking about, 60s and 70s, I don't want to name organizations, is not the same governance that we're talking about. Here we have the SDG rallying point. We have the UN, which is our UN. So we should also lead UN, if they are behind, like us. And that's what the civil society is. So if you ask me, I'm equally confused. I'm equally, I don't know which will go. But one thing Bangladesh knows, that we have to transform the world of migration for the migrants, not for the state, not for the business, not for the society, for the migrants. And you'll see that world in 2030 would be a different world. It will be radically different. The projection that we see, whether in the security field, in the trade field, or in the politics field, one thing clear. In 2030, it will be individuals who would be immensely empowered, perhaps more empowered than the state. That's clear. You look at any prediction, 100 years, 20 years, 10 years, which is coming out from all over the places. So individual would decide. So let's work on the migrants individual. And state will gradually lose its authority.
Thank you very much.
We have to bring that in this, our objective would be migrant rights. Let's talk about rights. There were times when we were not allowed to talk about rights of migrants. We were told we talk about human rights of migrant. What is the difference between human rights of migrants and rights of migrant? So let's talk about rights of migrants. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You are the future chair of the GFMD, so it's normal that we give you more time, and especially because you have set us a challenge we will take on this question of governance, and you will open the way also for us to have the opportunities to be able to discuss this. So thank you very much.
During our chairmanship, civil society, I've declared it in Geneva, will have a special role. Even in the Bangladesh team, we will include a civil society member who will be part of the delegation. In our coordinating office, there will be office for the civil society. Any civil society member can come and sit and see how we are doing it.
Thank you. Fatumo and I, we are future ex-chairs. Here we have a future chair, and we have here also a representative of the after future chair. So, Sonke Lawrence, thank you very much for being with us. You are head of unit on migration issues for the German Federal Foreign Office. And the Nobel Prize for 2015 was awarded on Friday. I don't know if you had time to follow that. It was to the National Dialogue Quartet, comprised of 4 key organizations in Tunisian civil society. A role of mediator to serve as an example for other countries. I think this is important, what happened on Friday. But to link to Germany, well, Mrs. Angela Merkel was mentioned as a potential for this year's Peace Prize for being the European leader who showed, I quote, compassion in adversity. We also see leaders who have received Nobel Prizes for supporting strong economies. But those words, compassion in adversity, the government that is a lead that, as future chair, would very much welcome from you the perspective of what Germany is thinking to do in the next years, leading to 2017, because these are all building blocks that we're putting, and we're also looking at 2030. But here we're much shorter term here, with a really strong position that was taken by the future chair, and how far can you already see what will be coming in 2017? An easy one, isn't it?
Thank you for inviting me to this event today. Yes, we will start to transform the world right after Bangladesh has shown us the way next year. However, we will do this jointly with Morocco, because we will be the co-presidency with Morocco from 2017 on into 2018. And we are looking forward to this because we want to build the bridge between the developing world and the developed world, also by showing that we can organize and lead together. Yeah, how can we transform the world? I think we need to do 1,000 or 1,000,000 small steps to do that. It's not the magic wand that you wave and then everything is good, but it will take the combined efforts of the governments, of the civil society, by networking with one another in all possible and thinkable ways, by using all kinds of means of communication, including the social media. Germany strongly welcomes the consideration of migrants and migration and refugees in the 2030 agenda, and we also welcome the framework of goals aiming at people, the planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership, because this reflects also the main objectives of German external policy and development cooperation. We will therefore continue to promote sustainable and inclusive economic growth, as well as productive employment and decent work. These have been priorities of our policy and will continue to be. We will also continue to tackle inequality on all levels, on local, national, regional, as well as global level, as this is one of the root causes of forced migration. When we look at the current situation in Europe, we immediately see what the main challenges are. I think that the target 10.7 says that we have committed ourselves to facilitate orderly, safe, regular and responsible migration and mobility of people. And we are at the moment watching a big refugee crisis in Europe and in the Mediterranean. So we immediately see what the challenge is to guarantee the human rights of those who are on the way to Europe and who suffer on the Mediterranean Sea and elsewhere. So this is something we should focus on at this moment. And once they have arrived, we have to ensure integration in our societies. Those two things are the biggest challenges, I think, that we are facing at the moment. The latest figure says that 600,000 refugees arrived in Europe this year via the Mediterranean Sea already. And Germany expects at least 800,000 refugees this year. There are also already figures of up to and over 1 million. This is a figure that has been unimaginable until now for us. I think that this serves as a very late wake-up call to develop a national and a European migration policy in order to cope with these events.
Yeah. I'm almost going to bounce on something which is out of the frame of what we have to discuss. So, no, I'm not. But bridging is, I think, important. What you've said, the bridging, and also with the co-chair with Morocco. This is also something that we're trying to do in civil society, to bridge the different areas where we're working. And we spent some time these last 2 days doing this bridging exercise. If this is all right with Ephraim, Fatima, and Michel, I would like to turn out to the audience to see if there are some questions, because I think there's some really important messages that have come out here, and I prefer doing it now. And if that's all right with you three, then we move on to you. Yeah. So now I have to be careful not to get into trouble. Eh? Please, the gentleman over there. And then the gentleman here. and then here, number 3. And I think we would stay at 3 to start with. Yeah. Please go ahead, shortly present yourself, and see if you can finish with a short remark.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rex. I represent Migrant Forum in Asia. Everyone, and I thought that Mr. Huck is more agitational than many of the civil society speakers. So thank you very much. Yeah, we do get inspiration from each other. I'm speaking because, as we are saying, Civil Society Days was created because, as the chair was saying, PGA and many other groups pushed for it since the very birth of the GFMD. So CSD is itself a product of our advocacies. So one thing that I wanted to present is, we have been talking about action indicators, game changer. One of the big game changers we need to do is, this year, we celebrate the 25th year of the Migrant Workers Convention. And to me, it's a collective slap in our faces that it is the second least ratified of all the UN core instruments. We are the big civil society. If we could not even do that game changer, I don't think we have the kind of the face to look at the world and say we are changing migration. So my proposal is, can we make the demand to ratify the Migrant Workers Convention the first demand tomorrow that we see, that we present to the common space? And secondly, all of us made GFMD, CSD, we have come together to the Step It Up campaign, saying that we want to have more ratifications of the Migrant Workers Convention. So tomorrow, when we face the governments, can we actually stand up when our speaker comes on stage and say, ratify, ratify, ratify? Thank you very much.
So, did I get your question to the panelists? Is your government going to ratify? Is it that?
Ahmed Bugri, and I think that it was just a wonderful thing to hear the strong advocacy for the equality or the rights of migrants. My concern is for our European co-chair from Germany. There is a shift, as yesterday we heard from Peter, a shift from concentrating on refugees and vilifying migrants in public discourse and in government discourse. Integration is usually talked about in terms of the refugee, but not the migrant. There are so many undocumented migrants in Europe who have lived for many years. And I think that my question is, in particular in Germany, there are so many as well. Will there be kind of an action towards the comprehensive regularization of these persons? Because to talk about integration and not look at the issues that we have dealing with migrant rights in the first place, I think that is a misnomer.
Yeah, that would be all right for you, that question. We take another one. It was down there, I think it was Dennis, was it? Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Dennis Signolo from Education International. For those who may not be aware, we're a global federation of educators, education unions with a membership of over 32 million from early childhood to university, present in 171 countries across the globe. 3 points just briefly.
You're sure it's going to be briefly? Because when you announce
that's
3
what I've
points,
said. That's what I've said. The first point is, we've heard so many good things, so many concrete recommendations. But what happens with these recommendations from here? Are we going to leave and then meet again next year, come up with yet another set of recommendations? This is fundamental, bearing in mind that in fact the GFMD has no enforceable recommendations. So that raises the second point of making sure that the UN plays a significant role in dealing with issues of migration. So it's important to make sure that the International Labour Organization, for example, has a leading role because, as we know, more than 90% of all people who move across national borders do so for work purposes. So migration is a labor issue, basically. So I'm calling for a more concerted effort for the UN. By UN, I'm talking about UN member states, intergovernmental organizations, it's governments really, because within the UN platform, it will be possible to come up with concrete actions which can be implemented and enforced. That's why the point of the UN recommendation, the ILO recommendations, remains important. The last point, I appreciate the good leadership role taken by Germany in dealing with the issue of refugees. And I believe all of us appreciate that in this room. It's important that we continue to do that. And this is an appeal to all countries to address especially the needs of children, to make sure that children have access to all essential services, in particular education. Otherwise, we'll have a lost generation of people who will have some discontentment down the line because they lacked education. So that may backfire in the future. So it's important to make sure that all refugee children have access to education. And finally, while all these good things are important and we acknowledge they are good, the only sustainable way is to deal with the root causes of the push factors, with conflict in the countries where they are coming from, with poverty, with whatever situation is causing them to move. We're talking about imbalances in economic development. All these issues need to be addressed. So we are appealing to all governments actually to improve their development cooperation and support for governments where these people are coming from. To make sure that in terms of our policies, foreign policies, we promote peace across the globe so that we have sustainable development for all of humanity.
I would take just two last ones, and then if you could give some indications back. There's a lot there. Eh? It's almost for another full session. So I know there's William and then lady. I'm sorry, I forget your name every time. And then William. Yeah. Please.
No matter. My name is Beshi Najafi. I work in Information and Counseling Center for Female Migrants and Refugees in Cologne, in Germany. I'm happy that you gave me the floor because otherwise I could criticize you because I don't have gender justice, because you gave the floor to 3 men and not a woman. So, but I'm happy that you do it. Okay. So, actually I'm funded from German government to be here, and I'm very happy and appreciate. But this is my job to criticize the government. This is my job. Otherwise, I'm not here. So you said, Herr Lorenz, that this is one focus of German government is to save the Mediterranean. Please tell me, how do you want to save the Mediterranean? For whom? For Europe? That the refugees, they don't get Europe, or for the refugees that they are on the boat, or do you want them to stay in their home countries? But how do you want to save? For whom and how? Because now it is a big discussion and decision to support, to give more money to Frontex to combat the refugees, that they don't come to Europe. Is it safe Mediterranean? Thank you.
William behind.
Thank you. William Goes from Migrant Forum in Asia. My suggestion is to, and following up on the on what Dennis just said about our recommendations over the years, I would like to make a proposition to the governments which could be taken up over the next 2 days. And one is, probably we have heard that there's been a lot of progress between civil society and government in engaging in the GFMD days. There's been trust building and things like that. We've gone through that cycle. It's now time for action to move to transformation. So why don't we start working groups that involve government and civil society on thematic areas like the post-2015, gender and migration, children and migration. Why don't we start working thematic working groups within this structure of the GFMD so our conversations can be continuous throughout the year, not coming one for 2 days at the GFMD and then going away thinking where our recommendations have gone, but to be able to follow through with those recommendations. Even in terms of structure, let's talk about having some kind of concrete infrastructure between government and civil society to dialogue continuously throughout the year, not only at this time for these 4 days when we are here, because there is much that we could say together that could move the agenda forward. I hope this is something that could be taken up in consideration in that trust building process has to go now to an action for transformation building process.
Thank you. The way I suggest we organize the different inputs, I don't know if perhaps there are questions, there are inputs, and there are suggestions. Perhaps for the suggestions that go to the future chair of the GFMD, there's one very concrete suggestion there. There were also the question around governance. Perhaps if you can take a moment, and then perhaps then Sonke Lawrence, if that's all right, if you can address the different questions. Are we saving the Mediterranean? Is there more behind root causes? The question also of refugee and migrants. And then, Thomas, if that's all right, if you can address the question that goes to the intergovernmental organizations by Dennis. Yeah? I know we've skipped some out, but please.
I will if I take the issue of whether migration is a labor issue or not. Of course it's a labor issue. But is that the only area that we should be looking at? I don't agree.
And the thematic groups that were suggested
I'll come back to that. Yeah. Migration has always been a geopolitical issue. It has always been a foreign policy issue. It has always been a rights issue. And much more than that, it is individuals' rights issue. That's where we have to focus on. If we try and box it into labor issue, then we are missing the whole thing. Number two, we should not try and bring migration out of the SDG process. We should anchor that there, because that the 2030 agenda, development agenda will evolve. If we take migration out, we lose the space. We have to anchor there, but two things. One, we should never take a silo approach. Number two, in the field of migration, up to SDG, we had 3 years of very substantive discussion, which is much rich, which did not survive in the ING process. We shouldn't lose out that. And we, in our chairmanship, that's why we're calling it SDG++. We'll try and bring in some of the rich discussion and the consensus that we had at the intergovernmental level. It did not survive. That doesn't mean it's not there. We'll try and bring in, have the second test. And that will enrich migration debate within the context of development debate. That's what. I'll just focus here. I'll not take much time. I know I can monopolize the discussion. I wouldn't want to do that. Thank you.
At the same time, yeah, but at the same time, can you go a little bit further with the suggestion that is there? I remember, when was it, 18 months ago, the government of Bangladesh and with the Swiss government organized
Sweden.
A thematic meeting and there were about 60 governments, and civil society was invited to work thematically on the question of migration and education. The call here for more thematic groups, is that something that you can take on board? Is that something that we can be working on together?
Yes. We have, with some of our colleagues from IOM, we have done matrix, where we had two invasions in Bangladesh, one in 2013, one in 2014, both looking at migration and development. And that created a platform. And I would like to mention especially Switzerland and Sweden. It was a very unusual alliance. Bangladesh, Sweden, and Switzerland got together at 50 to 60 countries. And we had something, it was not ING, but it was negotiated. And we are looking at this matrix. Some bit of it did survive, but some bit of the consensus that we had in Dhaka, which is called Dhaka Declaration, did not survive. We'll see how we bring in. The window that we are currently looking at is the indicated loan, because that is where things will really get implemented, the concrete examples. It is the countries which will contextualize, which will set indicators, looking at the targets. That's where we have to focus on during our chairmanship. And we are also thinking of having some pilot, that some of the indicators or targets or even the goal which did not survive in the ING process, can some countries pilot it?
Okay.
And see what actually happens. But it all depends on intergovernmental consensus.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. Sonke Lawrence, yeah, not easy, no?
I've been asked two questions. The first one was about the Mediterranean Sea. So we have been watching tragedies happening there, particularly since last year. I used to work in Libya during that time, so I was very close to what was going on at that time. And there has not only been a public outcry about what happened, but there has also been action taken by the European Union and its member states. And the operation that is currently being undertaken there is called Sophia, which serves to pick up shipwrecked everyone, everywhere, and on the other hand, try to work against those who are smuggling people in a way that makes them prone to dying at sea, because this is, of course, a situation that cannot be maintained. What the purpose of this operation is to make sure that those who wage their life in order to move from the African continent to Europe, that they are picked up, that they are safe, that they are put into a secure place. And this place usually is, when it is Libya, it's Italy. And when it comes to the refugees moving from Turkey towards Europe, it's Greece. And in order to help these two countries to cope with the number of people that arrive, the European Union is on the way to install places called hotspots, where these refugees are then registered, taken care of, and then resettled. This is, as you might know, a big question at the moment in the European Union, how to do this, how to relocate inside the European Union, how to resettle them. But this is the purpose of this activity in the Mediterranean Sea. Then I have been asked about undocumented migrants. This question came a little by surprise to me, because I'm not aware of a big number of unregistered or undocumented migrants in Germany. There might be some more now, because our capacities to register all the refugees coming primarily from Syria and Iraq, these capacities have been overwhelmed recently. So there might be some migrants now who we are not aware of. But I'm really interested if you have any figures or any estimates about the number of undocumented migrants. I would like to know more about it, because then I could try to give you an answer how to regularize their status.
I think we're going to be able. I think we're going to be able to bounce back really rapidly to Michel, who's going to be able probably to give some input on that. Thomas, short one on the intergovernmental organizations and their role.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, the gentleman spoke about addressing the root causes. Now we have, based on this strong input, the strong push by civil society, we have goals and targets that include retention of health workers, education abroad, labor standards, the remittances, the legal identity for everyone by 2030, and of course the importance of disaggregating data. I mean, all these things we have to now are part of what the leaders of the 193 member states signed up to and promised to their people. This is very important. This is a new social contract with the people. And the people need to hold their leaders responsible for it and make use of that. Now, we have to build the review process in such a way that it can be used for that. And we must make clear that the Sustainable Development Goals, they will not replace existing intergovernmental processes.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers and other conventions, the Human Rights Council, I mean, all these different conventions and international pillars that we have. They're basically the pillars that are holding up this vision, this roof that has been adopted. And so we need to build on that complementarity, make sure that everyone participates, and make sure that this becomes part of the dialogue at a national level. Your leaders have promised. We better hold them accountable. We need them to know that we know that they've promised.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Thomas. Michelle Levoy, most of you know her, no? Yeah. But Levoy, do you know where that comes from? That comes from French Canadian. It means voice. Okay? So I'm not quite sure if this is the name that was given to her once she became an advocate. And you're unlucky, she's an advocate on undocumented migrants. Or was it right from when she was a baby that her voice was so strong? So yes, Michelle. Michelle is the 2014 chair of the Civil Society Days and director of PICUM. What's the situation of undocumented migrants in Europe and more specifically, perhaps in Germany?
I'd like to build upon what the Foreign Secretary has said several times, and I think maybe could be a key word for us in going forward, is transform. How do we transform this situation, the migrant situation? How do we go forward where we're actually changing the paradigm? But I think to change the paradigm, we also have to take stock of where we are now. So I think this also addresses your question. And I want to kind of give a little bit of a global focus and ask a question. Do we think that the current paradigm is sustainable? No. So then I'll go forward. We don't think it's sustainable. The current paradigm, do we think that it's also very much focused in security for migration? Many of us would agree that it is. And I think, how do we start using some of these processes on the global level and the implication of civil society and other actors to start measuring and showing this? So the first one I want to give is it acceptable to have so many deaths of migrants worldwide? I think it's not acceptable to have one. But we have growing figures and estimates that, in the EU itself, we have figures from the migrant files that say there's 30,000 people who have died over the past 15 years of coming to Europe. Globally, there's no known figures, but we need to start measuring this, hopefully to start having an impact. And how can we start doing this? So I think an opportunity for us is Target 10.7, as was already mentioned, on safe and orderly migration, and Indicator 10.7.2. This is an opportunity because there's some language in there now that looks at migrant deaths. So far, it's only restricted to migrants arriving at borders. But I think to get the full picture, we need to add in a much more nuanced picture of what are all these deaths. So deaths in detention, including suicides of migrants, deaths at the workplace, deaths due to hate crimes, deaths during deportation, and the increasing reality that we hear from some regions, particularly in Central America, disappearances of migrants, which are very much unaccountable for, through land borders as also by sea. So I think borrowing on what the working group this afternoon reported back to us is we need to get around this statistical question. Many of this is not in quantitative figures. It's qualitative information coming from NGOs, it's coming from different sources. How do we discuss with the statisticians who will, in the next 6 months, be looking at this to find ways to bring up the reports that are circulating amongst many in this room about all these deaths to try to make an impact. I think that's one area. Another area that many have raised, and it's kind of also a leitmotif, I think, for the day, is the need for secure and regular channels for migration. We see the impact throughout the world. We know the impact because it's linked to the deaths. And many of this is also due to ways of entering, so for seeking protection through asylum, but also for workplace issues. So, for example, in the EU, we have a lot of legislation on highly skilled. We have the first instrument on low-skilled workers, seasonal workers, but there's whole sectors such as domestic workers and other sectors where we don't have regular channels. So then people who are literally dying to work in the EU cannot migrate regularly. So I think the point to build on here and to complement what has already been said, how do we have multi-stakeholder dialogues on this? And I want to also contextualize this. Multi-stakeholder dialogue in the EU is actually referred to as social dialogue. So this is employers, trade unions, and the institutions, so the European Commission. How do we broaden this to also include other civil society actors, such as NGOs and others who are very much engaged in this process? This was a recommendation that came out before. And I think the working group approach that William has suggested for the coming years would build on that. How do we use opportunities from now until the next year to have these focused discussions? The other area I think that we can no longer ignore is what is the broader impact of this unsustainable policy on the broader society? So what is the impact on social cohesion and the many people who are working with migrants, who are advocating with them? How are health professionals, for example, affected by this? This is when you start getting beyond our circles of advocates to see who is also working with us, but how are they also being negatively impacted by this type of policy? And so getting back to Germany, there are no figures on undocumented migrants, no precise figures in the European Union. In Germany itself, there's estimates, so we always talk about credible estimates, that can go up to 1 million undocumented migrants in Germany. The EU on a whole, we have figures that are about 8 years old, that are still estimates but are credible, that are between 2 to 4 million undocumented. So first of all, there's a need when we talk about undocumented to also bear in mind that we're talking mainly about estimates and how do we strengthen that with credible estimates. But I also say Germany, because we also have a situation where if you start looking at the legislation in different countries, and you take an example of healthcare, so 10 out of 28 EU member states go beyond emergency care and they give primary and secondary health care. Germany is actually one of them. So Germany is in the good camp, basically. But Germany is the only one that has a law that requires the social welfare offices to inform the immigration authorities about undocumented migrants. It's a duty to denounce. So basically, this law overrides the entitlement. So I think the opportunity would be, as future chair, how do we also look at some of these domestic considerations, Bangladesh, Germany, Morocco? What are the challenges, and how do we also fix them in a sense? How do we use the opportunity of the GFMD to address them, to show where good practices can be? I think the other impact that we have to consider is what is the impact of the rule of law when we cannot have a good sustainable policy? And how are other actors now being implicated? The UN Special Rapporteur on Migrants was supposed to go to Australia 2 weeks ago, and he had to postpone because the government could not give him confirmation that people who work in detention as service providers would not be sanctioned for disclosing information about the work that they were doing with detainees while he would be conducting his visit because of a new law that just came into force, the 2015 Border Force Act. So in order for him as Special Rapporteur on Human Rights to actually carry out his mission, he needed to actually talk to service providers in detention centers, but they might actually be jailed for doing so, so he had to postpone it. So how do we also look in terms of these UN bodies and mechanisms to ensure that these special procedures can also be carried out? I think I'll say that for the moment, so some food for thought. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah. I'd like to hand over to Efrain Jimenez. because the situation also in the region where you're working is quite something. You are executive director of the Federation of Zacatecana. Can you tell us a little bit more the role that can be given to governments and that you are discussing and that you have been discussing as you were with Martina Lipsch moderating the 2 sessions on migrant empowerment and action for human development. Yeah.
Let me see, that microphone is on. Yes, first of all, I would like to say that I do celebrate the fact that we are all here because we are looking forward to accomplish one mission. Think about your own mission and make sure that it happens. Without any doubt, I am sure that the CSD, Civil Society Days, and the GFMD, Global Forum on Migration and Development, has now been consolidated as the best platform to discuss and to address migration, development, and issues and challenges around the world. I would definitely say that throughout all these years, since 2007, that it came out with the idea to have these discussions at the global level, many migrant organizations have proved in many different ways that we want to make migration an option, that we want to promote human development, social and economic development. We are committed to be part of the solution. We are convinced that poverty is one of the main reasons of migrations. For that reason, we are committed as well to be partners in development, to end poverty in all its forms, dimensions, because as we know, poverty is one of the main reasons that create war and immigration. In 2013, 2 years ago, at the high-level dialogue, civil society came out with this action plan. It's a 5-year action plan with 8 points. Although we have this, and it's a very good, we had 2 points for each of the themes, it is by no means an easy task to implement it. And we need to make sure that this can be done at a local and a regional level. It's not easy to do that. The implementation of this is definitely difficult, and for that matter, we need to revitalize global partnerships among civil society organizations, governments, and the private sector. For that reason, I will call on the UN governments that we need resources, but for that, we need political will. Political will because we need to create a transnational fund. For that, I would also like to call on multilateral organizations so that this fund can provide funding for development organizations that are working in different processes to strengthen the capacity of migrant organizations as well. It is important for us to have this clear. Social development and social policy needs a policy that promotes sustainable economic growth, that focuses on social inclusion and environment protection is fundamental. For that, we need to say our governments that they need to see us as partners in development to all migrant organizations. There is something that I have to say as well. I have seen, and I heard before with some other participations, that there is this approach into migration addressing more the effects rather than the causes. I have seen that many countries are investing more and more in security and defense, which is good. We all want to be safe. But let's be honest and coherent. How will governments enable security when they are not investing as much in enabling an environment that promotes sustainable development and, of course, the right to not migrate? We need to address the causes, not only the consequences. I also celebrate that many countries that came together in 2013 at a high-level dialogue came out with this declaration of the high-level dialogue on international migration and development. As far as I know, this declaration was to be presented at the 69 convention of the UN, which, as far as I understand, it has not been presented yet. At this plenary session of the United Nations, it was supposed to be presented to all countries. Now my question would be, who will take the lead? We need more government leaders with the courage enough, with the conviction enough to take the lead and to present to all the countries and to make sure that this declaration can be adopted and, of course, implemented. I would also like to say that there is a lot of challenges ahead of us. And one of them is that we have seen that immigration has been dehumanized. Is being dehumanized, and it is important to say that we need to go out there, especially civil society, and be politically engaged. It is a must. Xenophobia messages are growing and gaining more momentum out there. We have seen it everywhere, not only in Europe, we have seen that in America as well. We need more anti-xenophobia legislation, and in order to do that, we need to improve the perception of how people, the public, is watching on migrants, how they see us. In order for that, to do that, we would also like to ask the government and the funders as well to invest more into studies that would highlight the contributions of migrants. It is very important into that. And just to make my closing remarks, I would say that there is the need. We need more policy frameworks that put migrant women, migrant children, and youth on a stronger and more balanced position that can enhance coherence and coordination with governments and other stakeholders. So definitely there is a lot of work ahead of us. We need to strengthen the cooperation, and we need to make sure that we are all part of the solution.
Thank you very much, Efrain. Thank you. Yeah, now I'd invite our last panelist, and I have two questions for Fatima. I don't know why she migrated to become a panelist instead of staying co-chair with me. But my first question is to ask, would you show a bit of empathy for your fellow co-chair who has to moderate this panel and has no more time? So that's the first question. The second question, and you're going to have to combine with it, is can you give your perspective of diaspora in the discussion we have as a director of HIRDA that works on diaspora? Yeah? So I don't know how you're going to combine both questions. Eh?
Yeah, the first question. I don't know.
Yeah?
Is it working? Because I don't have the other thing.
Yeah, go on, try. Go on.
Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, Ignacio, you have that empathy. And I am talking about diaspora and diaspora contribution. And my speech yesterday, I said that diaspora have been contributing to the development in any way. The MDGs, we have seen that diaspora was working on MDGs in different targets and different goals, but we were invisible. We were invisible, we were building schools, we were advocating women's rights, we were doing everything, but diaspora was invisible. In SDGs, we have got a chance to be part of these new goals. So what I was thinking was, are we going to celebrate and say, okay, we achieved and we have got our lobby? I don't think so. There is a lot of things to do. There is a lot of things to do, and I have something. And I'm asking the UN DESA, who is now sitting nearby, who is responsible about the statistics, about the data we are talking about. We have noticed that we need, as a civil society, to be early engaged to the indicator process. That is one thing that come out all the sessions for the SDGs realization. So we need to be engaged in early for indicator process, and we need to be part of it. That is one thing. The other thing that I'm going to say is lobby and advocacy. We were lobbying and advocating about diaspora contribution financially and socially. Not only remittance, but social contribution, like knowledge transfer, ideas transfer, all those things. We don't have to stop. We are continuing this thing. That is one thing that we have to continue to transform the migration that you said. The other thing is, we need political will. That is what Efrain has said. Political will. We have to have some enabling environment where we can contribute. We can transform the diaspora contribution and the migration issue. Other thing that I am just giving is the SDG is a multi-stakeholders and it is partnership. We need to be partner with the different stakeholders. And I'm saying private sector is very, very important. And it is something that we forget always. We have to lobby and advocate to be partner with the private sector, especially a corporate social responsibility, and I think we can do that. We have to be attended to be and lobby this actually stakeholder. We also said SDG needs implementation. We have been implementing MDGs, and HDGs is the same. So implementation is very, very important. So what we are asking to the governments and the UN is making able to have a funding for the diasporas, because we have a very, very difficult to be part with the civil society and mainstream organizations who have an expertise and infrastructure for such a long time, 50 years, 60 years, and we cannot compete them. So we are asking funding for diaspora organizations and migrant organizations to realize the SDGs and to implement. I am also saying to the diaspora themselves, we have to form alliance. We cannot work alone. We need alliance. We need alliance with the private sector, with the NGOs, with the UN, with the government, with local NGOs, with the civil society on the ground. We need alliance to realize that SDGs. So that is my message actually, and I think we can do that. We reach this level that we have that GFMD and the civil society days and the lobby and advocacy, and we have got the result that we have been represented by the new SDGs. So let us work together and make something happen for these SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This was called a concluding debate, but there's no conclusion. Is that we're continuing a conversation, and there are new aspects and new opportunities. The willingness is really strong that within the coming year or the coming years, and the coming generation, we do take these necessary actions and we do make the difference. And we have to align our different stars. I will have to close the panel, but really with a very big thanks to Thomas Gass, thank you very much. Haidul Hake, thank you very much. Sunke Lawrence, great appreciation. Michel Lavoie, Fatumo, of course, and of course Efrain Jimenez. Thank you very much. Yeah. We would be entering now into the last half an hour of the Civil Society Days, which is the closing ceremony. So we leave the time for the different panelists to come and sit in the audience. Apologies, of course, that we didn't have time for more questions, but the debate keeps going, and at different levels, also when you get back at your national level, of course. Thank you. Almost done.
Tomorrow there will be common space to which all civil society delegates are invited. You're all invited. There should be badges for you. You cannot use the badges you've been using for Civil Society Days. So that means that you have to go and pick up a new badge. You can do this tomorrow morning, but it's going to be very, very busy because there's lots and lots of government delegates arriving. So what we advise you to do, once we close off here, once we finish the session, to go and pick up your badge tonight. the government days and Common Space are taking place in the same convention center but in a different building. So you have to go downstairs and then there will be signs up where the registration takes place. So we really advise all of you who still have a moment tonight after we close to go and pick up your badge in order to be able to access Common Space tomorrow. Common Space will start, the opening of the government days will start at 11:30 sharp. So we really advise you to be there at 11 because, as I say, there's going to be a big crowd of government representatives, international organizations, and us. And we're really going to start at 11:30. So advise all of you to be there at 11 and do pick up your badge tonight if you can. Then a quick practical announcement for after we close. We can still use the building for at least another hour, 1 hour and a half. So if you still have planned bilateral meetings or side meetings, the building is yours to use. One meeting that's taking place that I already announced yesterday is a meeting of Made Africa, who's asking all delegates from Africa or from the African diaspora to come and join them at the room Dolma Batje C, if I'm not mistaken. So that's an invite for you. Then a quick remark about the reporting templates that we had promised to have distributed to you already. What we're doing is we're sending you an email, all of the civil society participants and observers, an email with all the reports of the rapporteurs included. There will be a few copies outside, so pick it up if you would like to have it on paper already, but you're getting it by email. These are all draft reports. Of course, we're going to consolidate everything that has been said in the plenary sessions and the breakout sessions into one final civil society report. And of course, there's going to be the chair's statement that Ignacio will talk about later. Then another practical announcement for anyone that's having an exhibition up on the first floor or the ground floor. These need to be taken down, I'm afraid, before 6 p.m. So anyone that's having an exhibition, if you could, after we close, go down and take your stuff down. That'd be great. I think that's all practical announcements. For Common Space, we'll put up a slide later on so that you really know where you need to go to pick up your badge tonight. And I thank you all very, very much for these Civil Society Days. It was a pleasure to be working with you.
So, almost there, but almost there for a meeting, not for the voyage on which we are on. Yeah? I'd like you to take a moment and think on one of the major takeaways you have. What was new, different, inspiring? What did you get out? Then I would like you to turn to your right-hand neighbor if you have one. If not, you go to your left one and just share it with your neighbor. One inspiring thing that you had. I hope it comes. Yeah? And you just share it with your neighbor. Just 1 minute to do that. Nothing inspiring, is there? Okay, thank you. Now it's the difficult exercise. Thank you. I liked the noise of all that. I liked the noise of all that. So you do have things to bring back home, don't you? Because this is not about a meeting, is it? this is not about a meeting. It's about much more. And to remind you a little bit at the opening, when we spoke about delegates and what the delegates mean, and it's a movement and it's continuous efforts. It's not planning for the next meeting. It's in all the work we're going to do in between. 17 Sustainable Development Goals to achieve 3 extraordinary things in the next 15 years. End extreme poverty, fight inequality and injustice, and fix climate change. Not bad, eh? An agenda which is built on an exciting and often binding legal framework. Sorry, not exciting, existing. For this to be a successful, sustainable process, clarity of vision is essential, and we must all understand these global goals and push for their effective implementation. We should not let the scale of the ambition obscure the opportunity to develop global solutions. And I would like to take the call that Saidul Hake, the Foreign Ministry of Bangladesh, sent to us, think out of the box. What do you see here? Does everybody see a dot? Change the perspective and see a white page. In there, there's a dot. But change the perspective. You can see a white page. And I think that's what we have to do. Eh? We talked about lack of evidence, sometimes working like that? Working on assumptions, trying to see the whole picture. Trying to see the whole picture. See, it helps. At least it helps in my life. I hope it helps in your life, and I think it would help in the work that we're doing. We have to bridge towards other issues. We have to create the connections, or keep on creating the connections. One of the innovations of these civil society days have been this effort of bridging, with the bridging documents around women, around children perspectives, for them to, as they appear in the 8 points of the 5-year action plan. Having the whole picture is important for successful policy on migration and development. And policy has to be built on 2 things. On values. The 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda is that. It's about values. And it has to be built on evidence. Values and evidence. And there we can build successful policy. The way that we interpret the world is inevitably subjective. But what is happening in front of our eyes are objective. They are undeniable facts. And things that have come from the civil society days, from last year on equality, I remember that one. The richest 85 people on the globe control as much wealth as the poorest half of the global population put together. You remember? They could squeeze onto a single double-decker. The poorer countries are being forced to bear the brunt of coping with the world's multiple refugee crises. Developing countries, mainly in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, are currently hosting 86% of the world's total, almost 20 million refugees. Those are facts. The barbed wire fences being erected to deter migrants and refugees across Europe, but also the migrants as source of innovation, entrepreneurship, productivity. Those are undeniable facts. The speech of the opening session tomorrow, which I'm preparing and I will deliver, will not cover, of course, all the recommendations and all what has come out from these civil society days. there is a written report, but I'll carry, as best as I can in the plenary, what I feel is more the spirit and the dialogue that we have had at this level. And the spirit, I define it, and I hope you more or less agree on this, we can't agree on everything, it's a kind of gentle optimism, but with a fierce determination. And we are not naive. I will carry forward some of the recommendations, but mainly I would want to bring forward a message that governments are clearly not doing enough. That civil society is mobilized, but also ordinary citizens. I mean by that when we talk about civil society and we look at how all over the world people go out, move completely independently. I say in my organization, for how long more are we going to be relevant the way we are organized? Are we not too far away from the citizen itself? So it's a big challenge for all our organizations, of course, but it's really important to say that there are organizations and there are people, individuals, and we have seen in the last months a lot around there going on. As the us that I talked about here, I think we emphatically reject building blocks of migration policy, based on prejudice and fear, of walls, of barbed wires and prisons, of stereotypes, of us and them. And thank you, Holly, the poet who was there yesterday, us and them. We reject all that. And just the same way with governments, we want to be more involved and working more with governments. This is about a strong dialogue, and Peter Sutherland said it yesterday too. Now is the moment, and we really have to move. We have to move in talking also and engaging now in real discussion around governance, and governance where civil society has really a strong place. I started this morning with the rapporteurs. We were here a bit earlier than others, and I'll be integrating the elements from the rapporteurs' reports as much as possible. I want to thank the moderators, the speakers, the note takers, and the rapporteurs, of course. And I still wanted to say that I feel there's so much goodness in this room. And there's a lot of goodness in the world, and we must not go through life focusing on the negative. And that doesn't mean we should not express, again, fierce determination to our governments and other stakeholders, and also including ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I was just told I'm thanking everybody, and then Fatima was going to thank ICMC. You don't have to do that. This thank you goes this way and this way. And it is my job and my joy and my thrill to do some of the thank yous. That's for sure. And the thrill is because there's so much that comes out of these convenings here. We thank our chair, Ignacio Packer, Secretary General of Terre des Hommes. Wasn't he magnificent, huh? And yet we will put something on the page, and we will connect the dots. And we'll think outside the box and fill the empty space. So thank you for the inspiration. We thank our co-chair, Fatima Farah, Executive Director of the Himilo Relief Development Association. Fatima. Thank you for bringing so much of yourself right from the start in all of this work. We remember you from last year already, and now we will never forget you this year. Thank you. Thank you so much. We want to thank the Turkish hosts and our donors. Want to thank the venue here, this convention center. Thank you, the interpreters. Thank you very much. our other interpreters, that great choir last night, and Enzo for the welcome reception. Our artist organizer, Ruina Martinez-Ulayan, for the exhibition, and the local migrant artists. Of course, our host, the government of Turkey, this difficult week here in Turkey. And we want to remember the difficulty. We want to remember what Turkey has brought to this global forum in its own struggle with so many of the forces in this region, and that work goes forward. Our donors that help us come together, the European Commission, the governments of Australia, Bangladesh, Germany, Netherlands, Sweden again, thank you, Switzerland again, thank you, and the United Arab Emirates for the first time. Thank you, donors, for making this possible. I want to thank our staff team, the local organizers Ursu and Derya. ICMC Turkey, we have an office here in Turkey, ICMC, that works with refugees and has for 20, 30 years, that this past year helped 7,000 refugees resettle to the United States and over the years to other countries. 7,000. This next year, the number is going up to 9,000. So our ICMC Turkey office, all the staff that work so hard on that actually have been here all week at registration, managing the rooms, managing all of the logistics. Thank you very much, ICMC Turkey. The heart and soul of whatever we might do right in this organizing around migration and development. The team in Brussels, the Migration and Development MAID team, led by Wies Maas. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. But really what drives this all, what helps us find the chairs and co-chairs, what helps us put together what we think was this year a particularly effective mix of speakers and focuses and themes, and actually goes through the difficult process of trying to wrestle with 800 applications from around the world of people who want to be here from civil society, and tries to do a fair job, of matching a manageable number, this year close to 300, with the issues that have such burning urgency. That's a difficult process. And that's done never perfectly, but always, I think, fairly properly, if I can say, by the International Steering Committee. This year it was 40 people from around the world working on advice and systems to try and get this right. So to the International Steering Committee, if you would just stand, so we'll give you a clap. Thank you. Thank you for all the work. Steering Committee. Thank you. Thank you. So I close this just before Fatima says extra things that we really probably don't deserve. Huh? But I want to close this where we really started, and that's with just maybe a thought of poetry. Huh? And this comes back to Wies Maas and the idea of the wall of dreams. The wall of dreams. You know, if there's someone on our team who dreams, it's Wies Maas. And if there's someone on our team who dreams about ways to get over walls, to get over bad walls, like so many migrants do, with the dreams that take us over the walls, it's Wies. So I want to thank you, Wies, in a special way for all the work this year and now the last 5 years. And I want to just read a short poem on Wies's wall of dreams outside that someone put up today or yesterday. It's a Turkish poem. I think it's the one Turkish poem on the wall, a short one. And this is how it goes. Before dawn spreads its light on time, before the mountains unfurl the earth, if any of you wake up, I wake up too. Wind in the fields, noise in the marketplace, living renews itself again. If any of you get hungry, I too get hungry. No matter how ugly, no one should be left out. His or her warmth should be spared from the chill. If any of you love, I too love. To love is to double the world. Thank you, Istanbul. Huh? Thank you for this global forum. Next year to Bangladesh. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I come again. John has said everything to say thank. I'm just going to say, everybody has said something, a poetry or something else. I'm just going to sing. It is a song, and it is about the song of you have to work hard to get that harvest. You're making you are making my artist. Okay, great. Okay, I'll do that. It is a song that we do when we are getting harvest, actually, and it is very, very nice song, and it means hard work, and then you will get it. So you might be not understand, but the rhythm is good. So it is some relaxing, actually, for the closing ceremony. And maybe if you understand the rhythm, you can maybe sing with me. And it is, we say, Ninka perta fasha mabaho de weligis na mabuko de anis parro. Ninka perta fasha mabaho de anis parno weligi mabukto mabaho de anis parno. Thank you. And An is Barno is we have to educate ourselves. Educate ourselves what we can, and what we can to the others and to us. That means we have to advocate and lobby for our contribution as a diaspora organizations, as a diaspora migrant, as a diaspora individuals. So An is Barno is educate to others and to us. John has said, we don't need to thank ICMC, but that's not true. ICMC is a great organization who put the civil society organization at this level. Yes, that is actually. So we have to thank them. I'm going to thank, on behalf of the steering committee, the chair, Ignacio, all of you, actually, the civil society, the individualists, the intellectuals, the university, all of you who participate in this conference, I will thank ICMC for this great job that you have done. And give applause. This is great. Maybe you don't like it, but it is it. And it is a contribution of diaspora. And I hope that you will continue this job to the next year and the years coming after, and that we have to make it happen. Migration and development transforming to real action, partnership. That is what we are going to have. Thank you very much, all of you, and I hope that we have tomorrow a statement that the government can take and create a real partnership and action. Thank you very much.
Thank